Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am joined by the lovely Rob Leigh, author of Pathlighter, a debut novel from this author. And we're going to talk about the book, the writing experience, everything. All of you had questions too. So we're going to dive into this. Rob, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Can you introduce your book and maybe tell us a bit about what your debut is, what readers can expect?
Yeah, for sure. So the book is called Pathlighter. It came out a week and a day ago. It is very much Greek mythology inspired. Centers around a cast of characters, but the main character's name is James. He is very disdainful of the gods. He isn't much of a fan of them, and despite that, he has a connection to the flame from the gods' temple, meets other people like him, and then also meets some older beings that really don't like him and the people like him. So there's a lot of gods versus titans type vibes in there, especially if you've watched Clash of the Titans or if you've read Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It feels a lot more like a grown-up version of that, something that's grown along with that audience who kind of enjoyed Percy Jackson when they were younger.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. And we've got quite a few people in the chat already. We have Hale, we have Louise, and Bert. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And Bert actually bought it over the weekend.
Oh,
Enjoy, Bert.
yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
So I always love going back in time a little bit
Mhm.
to hear about origin stories. So
Yeah.
could you tell us where your path began with stories, with writing, where that passion came from?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that kind of informed my desire to write when I got older, and both of these happened when I was very young. One, my mom read Harry Potter to me almost every night when I was really little, so it was a great experience. Got my, gave me that original thirst for storytelling. My dad showed me Lord of the Rings when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I thought it was
Wow.
real, like a Ken Burns style documentary because of the Kate Blanchett over voiceover at the beginning. Took me till about
Mm.
the third movie to figure out that it wasn't real. But the fact that someone like made that up made me go like, well, what can I make up? And then when I was in middle school, I picked up Percy Jackson for the first time, and so that was kind of what got my interest peaked in Greek mythology and adventure stories, and um, you know, showed that fantasy stories aren't just like stories that are written a long time ago. Like people are still writing them, and that I could still write one day.
That's awesome, I love it. So, I have to ask, were you absolutely crushed when you found out that The Lord of the Rings wasn't real?
It was, and it was weird too because I told my dad about that a long time later because before the movie even started, he thought, okay, I better go through a few things just to like make sure that he's not like overwhelmed when. So he like took off his wedding band and was like, "There's this big bad guy named Sauron who had a ring just like this," and I'm like, "Wait, does?" So I was like, "Does my dad have a ring of power as well?" Um,
Right.
so it was quite a shock and disappointment, but also that inspired some other things for me to like maybe start writing one day.
That's awesome, and did you end up, going back to read the books, or did you just stick with the movies?
I stuck with the movies for a while, and then I read the books when I was end of middle school, early high school.
Okay.
And it was interesting to see the differences between like how the books were written versus how they adapted those to movies. And I think the adaptation was spectacular. So
Oh, that's great. I personally haven't read the full trilogy myself. I have read The Hobbit probably like a dozen times,
oh yeah, that's cool.
but The Lord of the Rings, the series itself has always been one that's seemed quite intimidating to me. So I think it's one I'm gonna have to do with the full audiobook and, Andy Serkis if he does it, that kind of performance.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. He's got a great voice for it.
Absolutely. And we have Scott here as well cheering on for you.
Fellow break in.
And, Louise here says, "I buy books based on author influence, and this is why I love Rob."
Louise.
Absolute sweetheart. So I've heard and I looked in your acknowledgments, you've been working on this story, the world, all of this for over a decade, right?
Yes.
how has that process been like for you doing it over such a long period of time?
Um, I think the story grew up a lot as I did. When I started, I was like 13, 14-year-old. So a lot of the dialogue definitely sounded like 13 or 14-year-olds, which
Right.
may not have made the best story. But then also just the understanding of the world. The world was very black and white when I started out. There were very clearly defined good guys and bad guys. And as I grew up and started to realize, there are nuances to the world, there's nuances to fiction and to storytelling. I think that, helped me to mature and help my writing mature on top of that. Um, and there were always the thoughts while I was like going through editing and everything. It's like, well, you thought of this when you were 14. Is this gonna be, is this gonna be any good? But the editors that I worked with really helped to, help that mature or grow up a little bit. So
Okay. Then, did it change much from your original concept, or was it just maturing some of the themes and the dialogue and aspects like that?
I think the original concept was quite solid. I think some of the central conflict, especially revolving the villains of the story, I think those changed to evolve a little bit more since it became less black and white, and you get a little bit more of a glimpse inside the heads of the antagonists in this story as well. Whereas in the first story, you really didn't have a whole lot of that. And I think that that just makes for a more well-rounded story.
Absolutely. And just out of pure curiosity, if you have a number off the top of your head from the time that you started writing this to the end, how long thereabouts did it take you to get the complete first draft, or as close as you can to a first draft?
Well, I had the story completed, I think, when I was 15 or 16, just based off
Oh,
of the
wow.
original concept that I had. And then I kind of let it sit for a while because, life took a front seat. And, I went through graduation, I went off and did other things. And then during the pandemic, I kind of had more opportunity to just sit around and figure out what to do. And
Right.
I picked this up and kind of looked through it and go, like there's some stuff that I still really enjoy here, and there's some stuff that I may, want to update. And so it took a couple years, but I finished the manuscript late 2021, early 2022. Um,
Okay.
and then at that point, I was sitting with this big thing, just going, what do I do with this? And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I did a lot of research, looked through booktubers like Daniel Green or Jenna Moresi and others to kind of look at what the publishing process was like, both trad and self-publish. But it was such a daunting thing at first, and still really is. It's something that I can't believe it took me, you know, uh, less than the amount of time I wrote it to get it actually out there and published. I felt like it would take a lot longer.
That's partly the beauty of self-publishing,
Mhm.
I as far as I've heard, is that once you're confident your book is ready for the world, you can move forward with that process instead of
Mhm.
having it sit as a draft on a shelf until someone else clicks the button.
Yeah.
um, a little bit more control in that sense. So this is probably going to come up a little bit. I know I actually had it for a little bit later on, but since you brought it up,
Mhm.
I am curious as to what won you over for self-publishing versus traditional publishing. What was the major factor for you that made your mind up?
Yeah, I actually did try for some traditional publishing at the beginning. I tried sending like a query letter to different like independent publishers and smaller publishers. I didn't even really consider trying to like get an agent or anything like that. Just decided, I'd send a letter out to so ever many different publishing companies. And there were some where I knew that I probably wasn't going to get anything back, and there were others where I was hoping, but pretty unsure. Um, and around the time that the deadline for the last one came about, I also kind of had a change of heart where I was like, you go trad, then you might not have as much creative control. You can't really go through like the artists that you want. You may not get the actual art that you want on your cover. So I think a lot of the control and the freedom of self-publishing is what won me over.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a big selling feature. You can have more control over that. Um, so with all that being said then, throughout your writing experience, through all these drafts and developments with your writing, were there any defining moments throughout that period that helped you grow as an author?
Um, I think a lot of it was just kind of trusting to know where the character development was going. I think when you are starting out a first draft, or especially when you're starting out a first draft young, you have like a vague idea of where characters are going to go, but it's it was a young person's mind figuring out what the character development for these characters was going to be. Um, I think that the biggest thing in the process was just allowing the characters to naturally progress and naturally become, um, who they were, and to not think that it had to be a certain way. Because when I was young, I thought, oh, I want this to be like Percy Jackson, but not too much like Percy Jackson, or something along those lines. But it allowed it to become something more my own.
Okay. All right. And what in terms of character development, was that something that came later on, would you say, or earlier? Because I know you mentioned it was one of the developmental stones, but I'm just curious how that changed as a younger writer versus an older one.
Hmm. I think when you're a younger writer, you kind of want the story to drive a lot of people, or drive your characters. Whereas my characters are all motivated by very personal things that aren't necessarily connected to the main story, and they all kind of get sucked in with the main story as it goes. So rather than them going on an adventure for the sake of going on an adventure, it's they go on an adventure because they need X, Y, Z, and this is the best way to do it. Um, yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So a little bit more motivation, a little bit more personal drive. Did you have to sit down with your characters for a little bit to discover that as you wrote, or was it something that you just knew needed to happen, or as you wrote your characters, you figured out?
Yeah, it took a little bit for me to actually sit down with them and figure out the why of why that character was doing what they were doing. I actually sat down and wrote biographies, or like bios from the character's point of view. So the character was saying, I did this, or I grew up this place, or my parents were, something along those lines. And that really helped me to figure out exactly who this person was, like what their personality was, um, figure out their place in this story.
Awesome, awesome. I love hearing how authors figure out their characters,
Mhm.
because each character is so unique, and how you write that character is completely different from another author, right?
Yeah.
In your acknowledgments as well, you also mentioned that Sanderson helped to reinvigorate your passion for writing fantasy. Was this from reading some of his books or listening to some of his lectures? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it was actually from picking up the Stormlight Archive, and
Nice.
yeah, and I especially during Words of Radiance, I really got um, a passion for fantasy stories, especially the nuances of his characters, and the phenomenon called the Sanderlanche, where he has all of these disconnected plot lines that all crash together. Um,
Yes.
So I that's something that really, really made me want to continue with writing and to give it another shot.
Okay. And uh, I'm curious, did this influence your writing in other ways? Like, did you find yourself wanting to do something to like the Sanderlanche, or making it your own, anything like that?
Yeah, I do. The Sanderlanche is just so cathartic when it happens. I feel like I really wanted to do something like that in my writing. So um, I've tried to make sure that my storylines all come together, even if they're disconnected. And it's something I'm exploring with my further projects, is to see how disconnected I can make the plot lines be, and then I'll bring them together. Um, So I'm enjoying that process.
Excellent. I love to hear it. As a reader, when I find those kind of experiences, like with Brandon Sanderson, and I read through, like I've read the Mistborn trilogy that he wrote. And the way that ended for me, I was just, mind blown. Sander all comes together.
Yeah.
And as a reader, I'm freaking out. I can only imagine if an author is writing that, if you're like evilly cackling in the end, or I would love to know your reaction once the whole series is done, how it came together for you, what your reaction was.
Yeah. Uh, it's the I'm at a loss for words sometimes when I'm thinking about just how plot lines come together, how it all works. Um, but I think that at the end of this, when I was like looking at the different plot lines for the first book, I was definitely there was some level of cackling. I just I
You
just
you
yeah, I just enjoyed you know kind of moving the chess pieces around on a board and making sure that they all had like a moment to shine. Each storyline has a nice conclusion to it. So
Nice. And did you have to start outlining? Are you still kind of, or are you a discovery writer? Do you outline first? How are you keeping track of all these little plot lines that are gonna come crashing together?
um, it's a little of both. So there's
Okay.
definitely an outline, there's definitely a plan, but you definitely have that room for the characters to grow and for
Mm,
those plot lines to grow. Otherwise, it feels more like a railroad. And of course, in some ways, it is because it's your story. Um,
right.
but there's some sense of while you're writing it that you want it to, you want to see how it ends as much as the reader does.
I can only imagine. Yeah, all that time and effort spent into writing it. You're probably
Mhm.
the first person who needs that ending. So Louise, we will pin this for later, but it has nothing to do with the book. But can Rob give us a poster tour at the end?
For sure.
Awesome. And we do have a couple questions, so we'll dive into those quickly. Louise also has, what's your favorite part of Pathlighter? Spoiler free, like what was the most fun to write?
Um, I think my favorite part to write in Pathlighter is conversations and more specifically arguments between characters. Whether it's a protagonist arguing with another protagonist, two antagonists arguing with each other, or a protagonist and antagonist arguing. I enjoy the the almost lyrical back and forth of two people that are at odds in conversation, not necessarily even in combat. But every scene has its climax too, in addition to the overall story, and I like finding that as I'm writing out dialogue.
All right, I like it. I love
Yeah,
banter between characters, so that's great. And Chris here, who is also a fantastic booktuber, go check him out if you haven't already.
of
But he
course.
would like to know, which character would you say presented the greatest challenge to write for?
I think without giving too much away, I think a character named Ryga was the toughest for me to write for, both narratively and uh, the prose associated with the character. I think was the greatest challenge, but it was also a lot of fun to write for.
Okay, I'm gonna follow that up because you've mentioned prose a couple of times. Did you include different forms of prose based on the characters or the story that you're telling? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you said lyrical as well.
Yeah, so um, I don't consider myself too flowery of a writer. I think I like to model more after those like John Gwynne or Joe Abercrombie, where their prose is really direct, but they still get to the point in an artful way. And so I try to be more deliberate with some characters that might be more sarcastic, or some characters that may not really have a sense of humor, and so they take things literally, or maybe someone isn't in the greatest mental state, and so to try and infuse a little bit of that into the words I'm putting on a page when I'm writing that specific character.
Okay, I love it. And Joshua here has a question, I imagine in regards to your t-shirt as well. How good is the new Beartooth record?
I do think it's pretty good. I liked the singles that they put out for it. I do enjoy. I think I enjoy their fourth record and their second record the most. All of their discography is good, but it's I think I was kind of there with their older stuff, and that's where I kind of first saw them live. So that's the stuff I remember fondly. But I saw them earlier this year, and they were fantastic before the new album came out. So
Nice, and we have Bo who's just popped in. Welcome, Bo.
no.
So for anyone watching, again, if you have questions, pop them in the chat, but we're gonna keep going here with a question from Twitter, and this is from Scott Palmer. What were the 3 books that inspired the writing of Pathlighter most? So I know you've talked a little bit about it, but, if you could maybe expand or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. So, like I mentioned a little earlier, I really, really thought that Percy Jackson was instrumental in, you know, getting the overall tone and magic and, pantheon system for this world set up. And it really jump started my interest in Greek mythology, and that kind of informed the types of magic that I wanted to write down, the types of villains and creatures and heroes that I wanted to write down. And so Percy Jackson really kickstarted that whole thing. Brandon Sanderson, of course, Stormlight Archive, specifically Words of Radiance, I think was a big one in trying to take the emotions of something large scale and put it onto paper in a way that people could understand, and then also the way of like describing a magic system, especially you know Greek mythology or Greek gods. It's a very soft magic system. You don't really get much of an explanation how it works. Gods just say, this is how things are, and then that's how things are. Where in a fantasy novel, you kind of got to be a little bit more specific than that. So that really, really helped, especially with his magic system in Stormlight. And then Mary Shelley's Frankenstein kind of helped me with figuring out my characters. So especially the characterization of Victor Frankenstein, how he, is trampled by his own ambition, and afterwards tries to fix his mistakes, but they're all band-aid solutions that end up getting more people hurt than helped. I always think that was a very formative experience reading that and going, wow, these characters can be so much more nuanced than I ever thought. So those are probably the 3 that are the most formative for me.
Very nice, and I completely agree here with Louise, Mary Shelley rep.
Mary Shelley
Excellent.
is the greatest ever.
Absolutely. We also have a question here. I'm probably gonna mispronounce your name, so I apologize. I'm gonna skip right to the question there. What kind of research did you need to do for this book? For example, how far can a horse go in a day?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, the individual here, his name is Nick. He is the DM for a Dungeons Dragons group that I joined years ago. Awesome guy, and you can also find him in my acknowledgments. He really helped me jumpstart creativity and building characters and character backgrounds as well. So thank you, Nick. First off. Second, I did a lot of research regarding maritime storms. So I won't go into any spoilers, but I did do some research on like what happens if you're caught in a storm. Like what are you supposed to do? So, but I had a lot of fun researching that. I went onto like r/sailing on Reddit. I went and read through like some different like maritime journals. I think I even looked at like I think there's a Sailing for Dummies PDF or something like that online. So a lot of really great resources there, and it made the scene a lot better. I feel like it made it a lot more realistic.
Oh, I love it, and I'm gonna ask, and if you can't answer, that's totally okay, because I've started reading this, and it is set in a desert. So from what you're describing, is there some travel in this book?
Mhm. Yep. without
Okay.
going into any spoilers, yeah, there's some travel.
Okay, good to know. Good to I'm preparing myself, see? And thank you, Nick, for your question. All right. So we're going to go ahead and keep going here. Now, this is the first book in a series.
Mhm.
Do you know how many books are going to be in the series?
Yeah, I'm hoping for it to be a trilogy. So this is the first in a trilogy. I'm currently working on book two now, and I have a skeleton outline for book three. I was talking to Matt last week about this, but I feel like it's a little daunting to do a trilogy because you want to be able to
Mm.
stick the landing with the third installment, but you don't want the second one to sound like filler. So that's something that I'm currently working with, and I'm having a lot of fun just kind of making sure that everything is planned out well enough while still leaving some room for it to grow. Excuse me.
Very nice. And are you thinking of expanding a little bit, maybe with short stories, novellas, or like a secondary series, or completely something different?
Yeah, so I do have the idea for a novella that's actually based off of a D&D character that I played with in one of Nick's campaigns. And it feels like something that would just be like a nice little fun jaunt, D&D inspired light adventure, something that's a little bit of a palate cleanser from the sprawling epic of Pathlighter. I was originally going to start the novella this month as sort of like my own personal NaNoWriMo, get that done. But I immediately fell back into Pathlighter 2. I like these characters too much.
That's awesome. To me, that sounds like there's hope for more of these characters after the trilogy. So actually along that line, because you talked about the genre and writing in fantasy, if you could write any other type of genre, is there one that stands out aside from fantasy or maybe a subgenre in fantasy?
Yeah, I really enjoy some science fiction stories, especially in
Nice.
like the cyberpunk subgenre. I think that the vibrant world, especially the one that Mike Pondsmith created,
Mm.
is something that would just be a joy to play around in as your own personal like sandbox and write a story, even something self-contained in there. If anyone's ever played Cyberpunk 2077 or played the role-playing game, you know what I'm talking about. Night City's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So okay, I'm a little bit curious here now too, because if let's say there was a theme, and this is all we're just chatting, about this, but um, if there was a specific trope or a theme that you could do within that genre in comparison to fantasy that you couldn't do in fantasy, is there something you'd like to explore specifically?
Hmm. I do think that sort of a Mary Shelley-esque like dangers of science, trying to outdo, human capabilities or trying to go against the laws of nature to an almost abhorrent extent is something that would be really fun to examine, especially in cyberpunk, because, at that, in the world that Mike Pondsmith created, or even an adjacent world, there really aren't any rules anymore. It
Yeah,
how much money you have and how much power you have. So um, I think that would be a really fun theme to explore.
very nice. Okay. And I'm always curious about those things because those kind of topics, to me, it's fascinating when you can go down those lines. The ethics, the morality, and the aspects you can explore with it are completely fascinating to me. So if you ever do that, I would absolutely love to see it. So you said you've got a skeleton for the trilogy. Do you have everything plotted out? Do you know how things are going to end? Or are you still kind of dancing around and figuring out how things are going to work for the Pathlighter series?
Um, a little of both. I do
Okay.
have I do have kind of an outline or a skeleton of how the major beats are going to go. Um,
Okay.
but the way I'm kind of writing things right now is in a vein of discovery. Just this morning I had some fun discoveries of interplay between two characters that I didn't really think would um, really have much chemistry or gel, and they had like some fun back and forth banter. So I'm excited to see where that character dynamic goes.
That's great. And you mentioned the Greek mythologies that influence this. Was there, I know you talked about Percy Jackson, but is there a specific mythology that stood out to you or multiples that you kind of pulled together, or is it just more generalized?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is more generalized just with the way that heroes in Greek mythology all kind of they use their wits as well as their strengths to overcome their challenges. So it's not just that Perseus defeats Medusa because he's really strong and awesome. It's also because he uses his shield to look at her reflection instead of looking directly at her getting turned to stone. Why Hercules or Heracles strangles a lion with impenetrable skin instead of trying to stab it over and over. So that's a big one. Is just letting my characters be smart instead of just strong. And then, in addition, I always appreciated how the pantheon in Greek mythology was more of a reflection of how the world was instead of what people in ancient Greece thought was morally right or what they wanted it to be. Um, and I always thought that there was something really compelling about that, rather than more of like a modern pop culture Christianity interpretation.
Interesting, yeah, and that kinda takes me into my next question because I did wanna ask you what themes or tropes you threw in here, but having read the beginning of this, it's clear you've taken kind of a dip into the religious factions
Mhm.
as well with fantasy. So, is that part of the themes or tropes that you wanted to explore in this? Is there anything else as well?
Yeah, I kind of did want to explore people's different interpretations of religion and how how one person might be very strict with their faith, others might be a little bit more lax with it, how others may not have any at all, or how some people may be anti-theist instead of just not knowing if something is up there or anything like that. So that that was something I wanted to play around with. But there are other themes of found family, of rivals to friends. That's a big one. Um, and then a sense of adventure. And then there's always betrayal, or not even malicious betrayal, but accidental betrayal, and atonement for that and everything. So I really like to explore those themes, and that those are some that you'll find in the book.
Oh, I like it, and, just, like I said, I've only started at the beginning, but I also noticed, that it starts off, you know, pretty quick. You throw us right in to the nick of things,
Yep.
and it does have some darker tones.
Mhm.
So, just so readers have an idea as well, how dark would you say the entire story goes?
Um, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's grimdark. I don't like to put darkness in a story specifically because it's dark. I think that Blake Carpenter, he was in an interview with Matt over at Beard of Darkness a couple months ago, and he had a really good term of noble dark. And I think that that is a good way to describe the story. Is there's some darkness, but there's also us characters and the themes of striving for nobility in a dark world, rather than just a depressing "the world is dark, do whatever you want" type stuff. So.
Right, no, that's fair. I think there's other ones I've seen where it's, not quite grimdark, but because it has a slice of hope.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
another one I've heard too.
yeah.
So we actually have a question from Twitter again from Callum Lott,
Mhm.
who would love to hear what your process is on world building.
Oh yeah. Um, the process for world building, I think, kind of goes along with when you're world building for a D&D campaign. Um, Especially if you're coming at it from a game master perspective, you want the world to feel like your characters live in it. When your characters are playing as when your players are playing as their characters, you want them to feel as though their character actually belongs in this world. So a lot of the aspects of this world, or aspects of like different homelands for different characters, um, I kind of shaped them to have some aspects where you can connect a dot between that character and their homeland. So there's a character that really cares about like their family and really cares about the people that they grew up with. Well, maybe that's a something that's very prevalent in that whole village or that whole region is just a lot of sense of community where you do anything for the people who live in your town, something like that.
Nice. And would have you mapped out anything yet? Have you done anything visual to represent your world?
Yeah, I I set up an account on Incarnate to kind of plot out where things are, and for future installments or future editions of the series, or future editions of this first book, Pathfighter, I am hoping to maybe put a map in at the front because we all love maps. We all
Yes.
love maps of our fantasy books, but I think that. Um, a map is nice, but a map doesn't necessarily have to be there for the service of the story. I like to think back to the first Law trilogy for Joe Abercrombie. The
Mm.
edition that I read never had any maps, but he was able to explain things in a way where I knew where stuff was when he was talking about it. So
Yeah, I think it's more for as a reader anyway, looking at you finish reading the book and you look at the map and you're like, "That's where that is."
yeah.
Oh, you can have a little nerd out moment.
Mhm.
So speaking of your characters, let's dive into them as spoiler free as we can,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would love to know more about them. So in terms of writing your characters, what was it like writing James's character, the protagonist here?
It was a really interesting experience. Because he is a person where he's simultaneously has had to grow up very quickly because of his circumstances, but he also has a lot of growing up to do. So exploring this person who has kind of been on his own for a long time and then also has to learn to like interact with other people. The lone wolf stereotype is very very prevalent in fantasy, but I wanted to come at it from a side of this person's being really immature, and so they have to kind of learn to act like a member of a group or a member of society, but just from a sense of like growing up rather than the cold-hearted mercenary that learns to have friends or something like that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And was there a character that you really enjoyed writing or one that you really well, you talked about the one you struggled with, so the one that you really enjoyed writing then?
Mhm. I It's hard to choose one. I
Okay,
really also enjoyed the character of Samira,
okay.
or some characters call her Sam. I think that going through her story and her motivations and her thoughts was something that in earlier drafts I struggled with, and so this final pass through of writing the manuscript over the last couple of years has been really fun to finally feel something click with her story.
Oh, interesting. And, so I'm curious when you were writing these characters, were there moments where you had to take a break from one? Or moments where you just had to nail it all out, get it all off your chest and explore that character primarily?
Yeah, I think there were instances of both where a character just wasn't like I just wasn't really interested in what that character was doing at the time, or there was a character where I was extremely interested in what they were doing at the time. So I would just create a separate document and then write another scene of them in the future or something like that, or write another scene of them doing the same thing as the other characters in a scene, but maybe from their perspective, just to see if I could glean anything else from it.
Okay, interesting. And this is the whole thing, is it one POV or is it multi POV?
It's multi POV.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so there are some characters where I'd be in a point of view of, let's say, James, and then I'd be okay. Well, I know how James feels during this whole thing, but how does this character feel about it? And so Sometimes I would switch over just because like we need to know where this character is coming from, or I want to see where this character is coming from, even if we're going to stick with James for this chapter or something like that.
Nice. Okay. I like it. Multi POV is fun as a reader, but I imagine it's fun as an author because you get to see the storyline from different perspectives and putting all that puzzle, like all the puzzle pieces together.
Hmm.
Um, because I imagine with one POV, you're limited in what you can share. I would think. I'm not an expert. But, with multi POV, you can allow the reader to explore more while
Yeah,
still yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
no. I think that there is a really fun element of storytelling where you have just one POV, and especially if it's a character who's very socially awkward or they don't really know what other people are thinking. I'm reading a book right now, Ocean of Others by Joshua Scott Edwards, where
Okay, yes.
as far as I've read in the book, I'm about three-quarters of the way through. It's one POV, and I'm really enjoying getting inside the headspace of this character as he interacts with others. Um, so I think it just kind of depends on your preference, but I personally like going for multiple POVs because I like to explore the whole group instead of just one person.
Definitely. And so we're actually gonna, pop in a question again from Twitter. We had a few of them from Twitter this time. From Chris DeSantis,
Mhm.
who says, "I love the cover.
Oh yeah.
What's the story behind its creation?"
So first off, the cover art is by Felix Ortiz. Awesome guy, amazing artist. If you aren't familiar with him, you can just look in the indie community and you can find his art everywhere. He's just a phenomenal artist, really great person to work with. But I wanted something that felt like a Greek epic or like a fantasy epic. Um, and I knew that I wanted James, our main character, right front and center with the ball of fire in his hand. And Felix just kind of helped me fill in the blanks of like, okay, what are some other characters? Do we pick a scene from the book? And this is a scene from the book with a couple of additions uh, to kind of flesh out the cover. But there are some elements from a certain scene quite early in the book that you would probably recognize. Um, and it was just a joy to work on it. He would send me some proofs going, what about this? And I go, okay, can we change that? Can we change that? And then he would go and hammer it out, and finally it just came back absolutely perfect. And he's very good at what he does, very quick at what he does. And when I saw the final product, I was absolutely speechless. It was great.
It's a stunning cover, so, absolutely. I'm happy to hear it was a smooth process as well because
Yeah.
to me, it would be a daunting experience to try
Mhm.
and capture it in a visual, format and for that to be the first thing readers see. So I'm happy to hear, and it looks phenomenal.
Thank you.
Uh, so my question is, was Felix Ortez the first goal you had in mind, the first artist that popped up? Did you do some research and landed with him? How did that work out?
Yeah, so I think he was my first choice. I
Nice.
had looked through a couple of different um, booktubers again, so I um, was aware of design sites like Get Covers, where they can do your cover art too, but it's not gonna pop. It might just be like a symbol or a collage
Right.
or something like that. And then Daniel Green as well. I saw that he used Felix Ortiz for his novella Breach of Peace, and
Yes.
um, Daniel Green was probably the booktuber that I was watching the most at that time. And
Okay.
so I looked him up on ArtStation, and I saw his portfolio. It was amazing work and such a volume of work as well. And from there, I was pretty much locked in. There were a couple others that I reached out to just in case Felix wasn't available. Anato Finstark, I think, was another one. But
Okay.
Felix responded very quickly. He let me know his availability, and I was like, yeah, for sure, let's do it. So we kind of had some correspondence back and forth, and I was pretty thankful he was willing to work with little old me, just because he was he's pretty established, and he's now working on the Malazan covers for the Broken Binding. Um,
Yeah,
I'm very excited to see what those look like when they come out.
same. So, will you be continuing with Felix's artwork for the rest of the trilogy?
Yeah, I hope to. I actually was talking to him about availability the other day, so we have something tentatively nailed down, and so I'll be in touch with him over the coming months. So
Excellent. I love to hear it.
yeah,
Felix is probably one of my favorite artists for cover art, with good reason. He does
oh
amazing
yeah,
work.
everything he does just pops, and
Yes.
I can't explain it. There's just so much life in his cover art, and that's something that I really admire, because we all like to we all think that the inside is what matters, and the inside is what matters for books, but your cover is your best piece of marketing.
Your cover is your first impression,
Hmm.
so to speak. So definitely, yes. There's a lot of amazing artists out there, but it's great to see that the community is picking up so many amazing designs. For me, I love covers. I love buying covers, have them beautiful, sit on the shelf, right? Pop them out. And then when you go to the bookstore and you see the book covers that are just text, the giant text with like the faded black, I'm like, oh, so much potential for such a cool book, you know?
Those block letter white poster
Yes.
covers, they had some charm in the beginning, but then I feel like publishers just realized that they could get away with giving almost a blank cover, uh,
Yeah.
and that's when they kind of went downhill.
It's sad. I think of physical books as, an enjoyable read. It's my comfort, but they're also a piece of art. When you get them up on the shelves and you start showing them off, they're a bit of art that, you might hang on a wall, but I mean, too many pages for that. So so we actually have a question again from Twitter, but who is also potentially still alive, from Joshua. But their question was, what was the hardest part of the publishing process for Pathlighter?
Man, I think the hardest part, um, a lot of it was the initial stages of marketing. Um, and you can look and you can find editors, you can find beta readers through a lot of different channels. You can find a cover artist through many different channels, and there's kind of your pick of some of the highly rated print on demand or self-publishing services out there. Um, but marketing is kind of a whole different game, and especially as a self-published author, you do all of that on your own. You don't have a publisher doing that for you, and in many ways, there's a benefit to that, because you don't stop plugging your own stuff. You don't stop marketing your book, whereas a traditionally published, company will stop marketing your book at some point when it's no longer new. um, but just kind of figuring out, what platforms I want to be on, what kind of content I want to put out there. I started out on Instagram. Luckily, Matt from Beard of Darkness found me, and he kind of was willing to take a chance on me. So I sent him a copy, and he told me to get on Twitter, and that's how I got connected with you and Christopher Navo and a whole bunch of different people, especially a lot of my fellow break-ins like Josh and Louise and Scott, and all of these different people. So it's been quite the learning curve, but it's been something that I've really enjoyed learning about, is how to put yourself out there and how to market this book that you're so excited about, but maybe can't, put it all into one snappy post that gets a million hits or something like that. So um,
Yeah. And did you go through any resources, any research to help with the marketing aspect once you started diving into it, or did you just explore?
yeah, I did a lot of research on like self-publishing and marketing. Like I would just kind of look up like articles and resources, and my self-publishing service had some information on that as well. I looked into buying ads, haven't done any of that yet, but if it works for Ryan Cahill, it could work for me. And there's no shame in doing that either. It's you getting your book out there, and I respect Ryan for doing that and kind of just not saying that there's any shame in doing that. And then there's also people that I know who run their own businesses or have small businesses that they do on like Etsy, or they work for marketing firms. And so just kind of getting in touch with them and getting their opinions on the best way to market yourself from a small business or one person publishing standpoint. And there are a few of them out there in the acknowledgments that really, really helped.
It takes a village. It absolutely does.
It does. Trad or self-published, no one person is solely responsible for getting a book off the ground. Of course, you have the author who writes it, but there's so many people that get it to
Yeah.
actually resemble a book, get it, get to some place that's readable, and you have great cover art, and to actually get it out there and get people interested in it. So.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the no shame
Mhm,
because I think it's important when, you're testing out the field.
mhm,
You're trying to see what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what works for Ryan might not work for everyone,
mhm.
but you have to figure that out for yourself. And it's going to be trial and error, as most things are when you're starting out. So
Yeah.
definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's been nice to see just the supportive community of the self-published authors community, and even trad published authors are very supportive of anyone who's writing, because everyone has a story out there that they want to tell, and getting it to this point is something that takes a long time, and
Uh,
it's just nice to see other people who are excited about each other's stories, and a lot of the fellow break-ins here who are in the chat. I chat with them almost every day. We're all excited about each other's stories, and I'm excited when Tori puts out a new update about the Bloodstones, or I'm excited when I hear about Blake Carpenter's book coming out a couple months ago, stuff like that. So it's just a lot of positivity, and it's great to see.
Absolutely. And I know Twitter even it gets a lot of harp, but I think my experience so far has been like 99% positive because of
Mhm.
this community, and I think that says a lot for the people who are involved in it. So everyone who's watching, give yourselves a pat on the shoulder for being awesome people.
Yes, absolutely.
So, from your experience so far, what advice might you give to an aspiring author?
Um, I'd say just keep at it. Don't lose the dream. It's I'll go back to Sanderson because he's a big inspiration for many. But the hardest step is not the first step. The hardest step is always the next step, or the most important step is always the next step. Um, and it's never there's a lot of steps, especially if you're doing it all on your own, and it's a lot of steps even if you're not doing it on your own, even if you're going the trad route. But getting to this point is something that a lot of people want, and if you're meant to write, then you'll get it done, you'll do it. So
I love it. I love it. Thank you for that.
yeah.
We have Scott here with, I sung this in my head, I heard it. Thank you, Scott. So, you also got your book in your local bookstore. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's the local bookstore from my hometown. I've since moved away, but finding out that there's a fantasy and sci-fi specific bookstore in my hometown in Iowa was such an amazing thing to hear. And so I reached out to them. It's this small little place in downtown Fort Dodge, Iowa, and I got to go visit there last week for the holiday, and it was just so nice. So I actually am. It's being sold there, and you can order it online. And they use bookshop.com to do all the orders, so they get the money from the purchase, and they can ship it to you wherever you're at.
That's awesome, and there is a link in the description for that too, for anyone who's interested. Support local, support indie. It's all one and the same.
Support the Green Dragon Bookshop, everybody.
And I can only imagine how that must have felt for you when you were able to get your books there.
Yeah, it was great. I called up the owner of the bookstore, and they're absolutely amazing. I had a nice conversation with them. They were very excited about someone who grew up in that town wanting to sell their book at their store. So it was just a great experience overall.
Oh, I'm thrilled to hear that. And okay, so we're gonna dive back into your writing a little bit because I have a follow-up question.
Mhm, for sure.
So have you noticed any change in your writing process or any aspect of your writing in book two compared with book
Mhm.
one?
Yeah, I think um, book one, without giving anything away, is sort of me testing the waters of a large scale adventure story. Um, and so I wrote a lot of that just straight through as events happened. And I think this time, what I'm trying to do to to go even more in depth with the characters is to write each character's part out as that character goes along for their story. Um, and so in some ways, it's like writing multiple books instead of just writing one. And then, seeing how all that matches together. I have my outline, I have all of the major story beats and what's supposed to happen and when. And so it's kind of a nice way for me to still go through that discovery while, making sure that things are going according to plan and that I'm not all over the place.
And are you finding the process a bit smoother this time around? Because with your first book, you've gone through the stage multiple times. You've rewritten, I imagine, and come
Mhm.
up with the process over a decade. With
Mhm.
this, with book two, it sounds like things are moving a lot more quickly in comparison. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Are you kind of a little antsy about it?
I am a little antsy about it, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that I think having gone through this process now, and seeing a physical book that I'm able to hold in my hands, I think it's invigorated me, made me um, really excited to keep going. Whereas there's not a whole lot of uncertainty. It's like, can I do this? I'm like, well, you have some proof that this is possible now, so let's go full throttle and see what we can do. um,
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you're already in. No backing out now.
Absolutely.
And just for anyone watching, we're going to be wrapping up soon. So if you have questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. We'll definitely cover those before we close out.
Mhm.
But what else can readers look forward to in the future from you? Are you just going to keep plugging away at Pathlighter in the meantime?
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna keep plugging away at Pathlighter. I am hoping to get a mailing list set up soon. I think I mentioned to you before the chat, the working on getting a website up and running has been more of a Herculean task than I anticipated. So I'm working on that. And then at some point, I'd like to still get that novella taken care of, because I'd like to see what can be done with that as well. But for the meantime, keep plugging away at Pathlighter and just enjoying the fact that it's the first book is out there. Enjoying the soon to be coming releases of a lot of the friends I've made here. Um, and reading through a ton of indie books. I'm excited for all of those too. I've got a massive TBR now.
That is the danger.
Yeah.
This massive TBRs and trying to keep up. So Scott here also has a question. What software do you use for drafting?
Um, so when I'm writing, I actually use Google Docs because I can keep everything in folders and I can take it with me anywhere. I could write on my phone if I wanted to, or if I had like a certain thought, I can go back to the draft in my phone and I can make a note or something along those lines. Um, So that's what I primarily use. When I'm sending it off to people, I usually download it as like a PDF or a Word document. And then for formatting, I use Atticus, which has been really nice. The only thing with Atticus is that if you want something a little more flashy for a title page, you kind of have to get something in yourself. Like you have to actually have a title page designed, and then bring that in separately.
Okay, interesting. I always find the formatting process, eh, quite complicated. I imagine it's complicated. Um, People who've probably watched my channel before have heard me talk about K.E. Andrews formatting because the inside is just gorgeous. Each chapter's got floral artwork to it that match the theme of each chapter, plus interior artwork and all of that stuff. And her formatting skills are just incredible. Katie, if you're watching, I hope you do a course someday because those skills are just incredible to me. And, while we're waiting, in case anyone else has questions, final question from me.
Mhm.
Where did the inspiration for a desert setting come from?
Um, I I mean, always Star Wars is a great inspiration for anyone who likes desert orphans. I mean, I've made my own desert orphan in this story, but I just think that the juxtaposition of someone who has a connection with fire, living in a very dry, very hot place, it just seemed like it just seemed like a very sound place to set the story. Um, so it's something that I was happy to explore. I enjoyed exploring, and then having other characters with a connection to their own origins, exploring those too. So
Oh, I love it. I love the mystery around this. I'm gonna keep reading. But, in the meantime, thank you so much, Rob, for joining me, for sharing so much about your book, and to everyone in the chat for joining us as well, and the Mary Shelley love, absolutely adore it.
which I love for sure.
Yes. So, for everyone watching now and later, be sure to check out the links in the description below to find Rob, his book Pathlighter, the bookstore that you had mentioned as well. All of that is in the description. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, thank you, Rob. And as always, take care of yourselves, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.